Well, grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ, and welcome yet again to the 42nd Annual Convention of the Diocese of Central Florida. It's good to be together again and good to be back at St. George Church and the Villages. We were last here in 2005, exactly a decade after St. George was admitted as an organized mission of the diocese. The planting, growth, ministry, and hospitality of this congregation have been among the great joys of my time in Central Florida. So thank you to Father Hugh Bromley and all the good folks from St. George and indeed from around the diocese who have helped prepare for our time together. Thanks too to Andrew Walker and Barbara Coulter last night and Rachel Rottenstraat this morning, and all the musicians and singers who have supported our worship. I want to come directly to the point. The final episode of Star Trek Next Generation was entitled All Good Things, ... with the unmistakably hidden clause, ... must come to an end. I've come to the conclusion that we are nearing such a moment. I am hereby calling for the election of my successor, the fourth Bishop of Central Florida, in a special convention to be held in the Cathedral Church of St. Luke on November 19th, 2011. A majority of the diocesan bishops and standing committees of the Episcopal Church must then give their consents to that election within the following 120 days. That will bring us into the middle of Lent, and I would like to remain in the saddle for one more Easter and through the 23rd anniversary of my own consecration on April 15th of next year. I have frequently commented that April 15th can be remembered for at least four things. It was the day Lincoln died, the day the Titanic sank, the date of our annual visit to the tax collector, and the date of my consecration. Somebody has thoughtfully called these the four disasters. Given all of those dynamics, we have tentatively set April 21st, 2012 as the date for our next bishop's consecration, and we have arranged to do this in Calvary Assembly in Orlando, just as we did last time around. And that's why I said we are nearing such a moment. It is not yet at hand. We still have nearly a year and a half to go, and I intend to be very much engaged as your bishop until the laying on of hands and the passing of the crozier in that consecration service. The new bishop will take office immediately, and I will officially resign at that point, although I will be available to assist if he or she should desire that. The transition process is in the hands of the Standing Committee, and immediately following this address, I will ask Father Al Jenkins, President of the Standing Committee, thank you for re-electing him, to outline as much of the process as we can foresee at this point. For your information, the Standing Committee has asked me to join them for at least the majority of their meetings, and I have agreed to do so with two caveats. Number one, if ever they need to meet alone, they need only ask and I will immediately withdraw. And number two, I will comment on their proceedings only if asked to do so. It really is their process. And let me just mention that the first meeting of the Diocesan Board next month will be a special joint meeting with the Standing Committee to get everyone on the same page. These last 2+ decades of my life have been a roller coaster of joy and sorrow, mostly joy, as we've seen God work in our midst in extraordinary ways. I came here after 13.5 years in one of the truly great congregations in the Episcopal Church, and as every bishop will tell you, leaving your parish family behind is a very difficult thing to do. The experience of being so deeply involved in the lives of parishioners and families in the midst of their great joys and their tragic disappointments, seeing them day in, day out, week after week, baptizing their children, preparing them for confirmation and marriage, praying with them in the midst of crisis, visiting them in hospital, conducting their funerals, mourning with them, and sharing the hope of the resurrection is a privilege and an intimacy I know no other profession can match. My fellow clergy, we are indeed most fortunate people. But to go from that to being in a different congregation every week is a shock. It took us exactly one Sunday to realize that my family would not be accompanying me on my visitation schedule. But I knew God had called me here. There were remarkable confirmations of that, not the least of which was the truly miraculous provision of our home here and the sale of our home in Virginia. Both are long, wonderful stories, which I'll tell you sometime if you ask. And I also knew that whom God calls, he equips. So I began to live into the very different structures of relationships in a vastly extended family in which the bishop is at home in every one of those far-flung congregations. There are a few deep relationships that develop in many of those congregations, and there is, of course, a very special relationship that the bishop has with the clergy of the diocese. And by the way, you know we have some of the finest clergy in the world. Will you join me in giving thanks for them? I also had to learn how to work with the diocesan board, which is a very different critter from a vestry. I had one fellow on that first board who said, "I'm going to be very upfront with you. I'm going to let you know when I disagree, and I think that's going to be most of the time." He doesn't remember it that way, but that's pretty much the way I heard it. I think he was suspicious because he had heard I was a charismatic, and he was greatly surprised when I visited his parish and told him that out of all the congregations I had visited, his was the one most like the one I left behind. 3 days from now, he will have been my canon to the ordinary for 18 years. A better friend and a better partner in the gospel you could not find. Join me in giving thanks for Canon Ernie Bennett. I want to ask the other members of our staff to stand and let me mention them by name and hold your applause until I'm done. Not everyone was able to be here, but almost everyone. The Venerable Christy Alday, Archdeacon. Chuck Dunlap, Disaster Relief Coordinator. He is over there. Deacon Karen Howe, Director of Cathedral Audio. Marilyn Lang, Secretary to Canon Bennett. Karen LaPointe isn't here, but she's our financial assistant. Eric Moulton, Youth Ministry Officer. Cindy Muldoon, Receptionist and Administrative Assistant. Earl Pickett, Diocesan Administrator. Joe Toma, Communications Officer. And Melanie Walters, Secretary to the Bishop. Let me tell you, they work tirelessly on behalf of all of us. They'll see something that needs to be done, and they will just do it. Nobody asks who is responsible for this. They just do it. They are simply a wonderful group of people and a great team to work with. Join me in giving thanks for them as well. I'm often asked what is the best thing about being a bishop and what is the worst thing about being a bishop. My answer always is they're both the same. A crisis develops in a parish, a disagreement between the rector and the vestry, some kind of financial mismanagement, a violation of boundary lines, a problem between a parish and its parochial school or whatever, a crisis. That's the worst thing. But the bishop just showing up begins to give some hope. We're not in this thing alone. Somebody has been here before. We can get a handle on this, and that's the best thing. Most of the time, the folks in a local congregation are not very much aware of the bishop, the diocesan machinery, or the diocesan staff. But at three major points in the life of a parish, we become deeply involved. First, when a congregation is being formed, the diocese is at least the midwife, if not the birth mother. Becoming organized, raising finances, acquiring land, and building the first building is virtually never attempted without the help of the diocese. Second, when there's a change in the leadership of a parish, the bishop, the canon, and the diocesan staff come alongside the vestry and the search committee, walking with them through every step in the process. And third, as I've already mentioned, when there's a crisis of some kind, the bishop and the staff almost inevitably become involved. We try to handle things as discreetly as possible, but we are right there in the middle of them. For most of my time here, we have been on an upward trajectory, and after splits in 6 of our congregations over national issues in 2008 and 2009, I believe we're greatly into recovery, and the arrows are moving forward and upward again. How wonderful it was to begin our time together this weekend with the welcoming of Shepherd of the Hills as a parish. Exactly 16 years ago yesterday, we welcomed the congregation as an organized mission, but they hit a bump in the road in 2003. Father Ladd Harris had retired to Florida, and he thought his ministry at Shepherd of the Hills was going to be singing in the choir. Instead, he became God's man to lead the congregation through a wonderful recovery. As you saw in that slideshow, in the last 12 months, they have simultaneously built a magnificent new building, which is almost ready to be dedicated, called my good friend Bishop Jim Adams to be their vicar and now their rector, and achieved parish status. Congratulations and well done, good and faithful servants. As we begin this period of diocesan transition, it was not by accident that I asked Julian Linnell to be our preacher at the opening Eucharist. We are about mission, and it would be hard to find someone whose ministry more fully epitomizes mission than does his. Thank you, Julian, for reminding us so clearly that the mission of Jesus Christ remains at the very center of our calling. It's also no accident that running parallel to this convention, the Department for Student Ministry is offering its town hall gathering for youth ministry leaders, Sunday school teachers, and Christian education leaders, bringing our youth and young people into an informed commitment to Jesus Christ remains a central priority of this diocese. So over the next few months, while we're preparing for a change in leadership, I am totally committed to maintaining our direction. 2 years ago, the 40th Annual Convention of the Diocese passed resolutions to take on 4 new projects. Number 1, develop a diocesan strategic plan, which we did, and Convention adopted it almost unanimously last year. We said it is the vision of this diocese to be fully committed to the Great Commandment and the Great Commission, to love God with all of our being, and to go into all the world and make disciples, teaching them to obey everything that Jesus taught his original followers. We laid out 5 specific measurable objectives for the year 2010 to 2012, which we're in the process of implementing. Number 2, create a contemporary worship school, which we did. And we held the first of what we expect will be an annual contemporary worship conference at the Canterbury Conference Center, September 16 to 18, 2010. And as John Davis announced a few minutes ago, the next one is scheduled for September 22 to 24, 2011. Number 3, create a set of user-friendly tools for short-term mission trips, which we did. It is available in print, on CD, and online at our diocesan website. Some of you have already used these tools, and others are planning to do so in the near future. And number 4, develop a parish discipleship weekend, an in-house parish conference to call members of this diocese to commit or recommit their lives to Jesus Christ and his kingdom, and to teach all of us how to live out a countercultural form of discipleship. This one took longer than expected, but I'm pleased to announce that the materials are ready at last, and I want to read from the Parish Discipleship Weekend purpose statement. The purpose of the weekend is to provide an on-campus retreat weekend held at the facilities of the local church that communicates the teachings of the bishop's pastoral letter of April 15, 2008, focusing on the prayer of Jesus Christ that we live in the world but are not of the world. The weekend is titled Discipleship Weekend. However, rather than focusing on prayer and Bible study, which is often what discipleship classes teach, this is deep discipleship. It is Discipleship 401, not 101. The weekend focuses on the Christian life rather than Christian belief. The Discipleship Weekend calls us to holiness. The Parish Discipleship Weekend will identify some of the values that are challenging the biblical Christian worldview, call participants to repentance for our complicity and adoption of those worldly values, and challenge participants to make a commitment toward change. And I remind all of us that in calling for the development of this weekend, we also resolved that every congregation will hold such a campus retreat using these materials sometime during the next 2 years. So my thanks on behalf of all of us to Father John Liebler and the members of the Parish Weekend Commission for the hard work that went into developing these materials. In all honesty, this was mostly John Liebler's work, a gift of love from him to the diocese. Please contact him directly to obtain the materials, and please do use them. I ended last year's address with these words: let's keep on keeping on. Let's continue to make the main thing the main thing. Let's redouble our efforts to walk in love as Christ loved us. Let's talk to people about Jesus. Let's continue to plant new churches, strengthen existing ones, and do all we can to take Central Florida for Jesus Christ. I have no intention of loosening my grip on any of that vision and agenda, and I ask you to recommit to it with me. I want to say a few things about our work today. We have more resolutions before us than we have had for a number of years. Some of these have been generated by changes in the Title IV disciplinary canons of the National Episcopal Church, and some seek to address ambiguities in our own diocesan canons. The current national disciplinary canons were patterned on the Military Code of Justice, and it was argued that the Church could do better than the military. Perhaps so. But in my opinion, it is my opinion that the new canons give far too much authority to the bishop of the diocese over his or her clergy, and they give unprecedented authority to the presiding bishop over the other bishops of the church, and there is a tremendous loss of due process in their implementation. If a diocesan bishop or the presiding bishop is a wise and caring person, there may be no danger in these new canons. But I think there are few of us who might not be tempted to misuse the enhanced powers given to the bishops and the presiding bishop to act against those with whom he or she disagrees. I will tell you plainly, I do not want to have this enhanced authority given to me in my dealings with our clergy, nor do I welcome the intrusion into the life of our sovereign diocese of the unprecedented authority of the presiding bishop, and I have told her so. It is a radical revision of the polity of the Episcopal Church from its inception. So we propose to do two things that are in tension with each other. We propose to bring our diocesan canons into compliance with the new national canons insofar as that is possible under the Constitution of the Episcopal Church. But at the same time, we ask that this diocese memorialize the next General Convention to revisit Title IV in that it is inconsistent with the Constitution of the Episcopal Church. The Constitution says that no bishop, other than the diocesan, No bishop, including the presiding bishop, may intervene in the internal affairs of a diocese. And the new canons say precisely the opposite. The Constitution trumps the canons, so either it or they must be revised. So while all but one of the resolutions coming before us this afternoon may seem complicated, they're actually pretty straightforward. Revise our canons for clarity and to be in conformity with the national canons, and call upon General Convention to bring the national canons into conformity with the Constitution. We can debate all this if you like, but we really need to just pass the resolutions. They have been very carefully crafted by our Constitution and Canons Committee and reviewed by the Standing Committee in its role as Resolutions Committee for Convention. The other resolution, R1, is a recommitment to mission, and I hope we will pass it unanimously. 4 years ago, I told you of Karen's congestive heart failure and that I would retire when she needs me to do so. Thankfully, she's doing very well, and we are deeply grateful for your prayers in that regard. But occasionally she asks me, and when exactly is that retirement you promised going to begin? I wrote to Bishop Falwell with the question, how do you know when you're supposed to retire? He wrote back, years ago I asked Ernie Pugh the same question. His answer was so simple and obvious when he said, God will tell you when you include this question in your prayers. That was a year ago last month. I had not made it a matter of prayer until then, but since then it has been a matter of fervent prayer, and I'm convinced of three things. It is in the best interest of the diocese, and I have no doubt about that. It is in the best interest of my wife, and I have no doubt about that. And it is in the best interest of your bishop, though it is one of the most difficult decisions I have ever made. For several months, I've had a statement from columnist Ellen Goodman posted on my bulletin board. It says this: there is a trick to the graceful exit. It begins with the vision to recognize when a job, a life stage, a relationship is over, and to let go. It means leaving what's over without denying its validity or its past importance in our lives. It involves a sense of future, a belief that every exit line is an entry, that we are moving on rather than moving out. The trick of retiring well may be the trick of living well. It's hard to recognize that life isn't a holding action, but a process. It's hard to learn that we don't leave the best parts of ourselves behind back in the dugout or the office. We own what we learned there. The experiences and the growth are grafted onto our lives, and when we exit, we can take ourselves along quite gracefully. I told the Standing Committee last month that my love for this diocese is so exquisite that it hurts. If I could somehow, I was doing pretty well up to this point. If I could somehow miraculously make it happen all over again, I would do so in a heartbeat. Thank you for honoring me and supporting me for these past 21 plus years. I love you. And I pray that as all good things begin to wind down, they may wind up giving birth to even greater things in this great diocese of Central Florida. I call on Al Jenkins.